Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. This is the Cure to Failing Content. It's part one of our Conquering Content Chaos webinar series. I'm Chris Willis. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Acrolinx, and I'm going to be your host and moderator throughout today's sessions. That's me on the right, blue steel right there. Joining me today are two content industry celebrities. Starting on the left, I have Andrew Bredenkamp. He's the CEO and founder of Acrolinx. Andrew's been solving content problems for world's biggest brands for over 25 years. And in addition to the work that he does here with us, he's on the advisory board of a number of organizations. He's also the chairman of the board of Translators Without Borders. Also joining us today is Doug Kessler. Doug is the co-founder and creative director of Velocity Partners, Content Marketing Institute's Agency of the Year, actually. And as a brand in and of himself, Doug is an expert at establishing and maintaining an interesting and engaging voice in the crowded marketplace, while at the same time holding on to his love of data and analytics to drive brand value. Today, the three of us are going to talk about chaos in your content engine. It's there. I mean, you must know that or you wouldn't have joined us. So yeah, we're going to shine a light on that chaos. But does that really solve anything? Not really. I mean, just pointing out a problem isn't enough. We want to go ahead and suggest a high-level solution. And then the three of us are going to talk through that solution, panel style. And to be fair, we will talk briefly at the end of this about the Acrolinx platform because, well, there's a lot of ways to reduce chaos in your content engine. There really is only one way that can do it quickly and efficiently while saving you time and money. So if that sounds good, let's go ahead and do this. Let's go forward. So look, what's driving content in our content engines? Primarily, the fact that content drives the business. It's become very important. And in talking to our customers and leaders across Fortune 1000 companies, we see a few common initiatives that are really driving the need to scale and add efficiency to the content development process. I mean, most everyone we talk to nowadays is tasked with scaling content to support their company's digital shift initiatives. As a larger percentage of businesses get done from start to finish online, the need for clear, concise, and brand-aligned content grows. There's money to be made here, and it tends to be time critical because the battle for digital dominance is at a high point right now. And in the next 2 years, are really going to determine who wins and who's left behind. And with that digital shift comes, almost at the same time, a focus on customer experience. With limited physical touch points and an ever-increasing number of digital touch points, we see a need to develop content that really represents the business, specifically the voice, tone, and specialization, which is conceptually great, but exceptionally difficult with hundreds or thousands of writers creating too much content for your editors to cover and align with that company tone of voice, terminology, and style guidelines. At the end of the day, this is really seen by your management as a competitive differentiator that's going to create success or failure within the next 24 months. Finally, if you're like any other companies that we talk to, your brand is designed to differentiate you from your competitors and make it easier for you to find, or for you to be found in today's marketplace. Change is constant, and brand updates require a lot of coordination and nimble process. And the commonalities we see amongst our customers is that they really believe and live the idea that content is driving their businesses. They're aligned on the fact that great content helps acquire customers, keep customers happy, and that it aids in reducing overall business risk. So more specifically, content's leading the initiative to scale their businesses. But before we go too far, let's level set. What do we mean when we say content? I mean, there's all types of content, much that you see and even more that you don't. Andrew, how would you define content, and specifically the content that we're talking about today?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So, hi everyone. Content for us is really, I mean, I think where work gets done, where the businesses can, as Chris says, can succeed or fail. And in that, I think often it's important to be clear that I sometimes think of this as an iceberg where you have content that floats above the surface that everybody sees. This is kind of your awareness work, your shiny videos, the stuff that's really pulling people in and maybe starting a conversation. But then that shiny content that gets a lot of attention at the top is dwarfed by a huge amount of content under the waterline where all the work gets done. So, from a marketing perspective, this would be, from a customer acquisition point of view, this would be where the customer really, or the prospect really gets engaged and starts to want to find out more about the offerings, maybe compare it with other offerings, maybe find out exactly what's involved in being a customer. But also, of course, nowadays, it's not just about winning customers, it's about keeping them. And so we're also interested in making sure that the customer experience is also a pleasure and a success. And all of that, again, puts a lot of burden on the content. So as Chris said, the content is really a battlefield. It's an opportunity to be better than the competition. And it's really creating that content at scale, which is the challenge that we're talking about today.
Cool.
Yeah, if I could jump in there, guys. I also like to think of this. Yeah, I just like to think of this as, the world of content is so massive in any enterprise. It could be, your internal documents to employees and stuff like that. I like to circumscribe it with just by saying it's customer-facing content. Any content that touches a customer at all, whether it's support after the sale or documentation or it's all the pre-sale stuff that Andrew's referring to, all of that is touching the customer. So it's the kind of content that, for me, we ought to be kind of ring fencing for this conversation. It's not that governance wouldn't work on all sorts of other kinds, but really, if we just say, look, that's too big a word, let's focus in on stuff that touches customers, and we can get real about the impact of it.
So if this is the content that we're talking about, I think envision the chaos that you live with right now in your organization when you go to produce this kind of content. And if you don't have that image in your mind, don't worry, I got you. It looks a little like this. So, content's embedded into the fabric of every organization. We've identified that. It's like the air that the corporation breathes. Every department uses content in one shape or another, right? The goals are different, but content remains at the core of each function's communication strategy. And now what happens when those unique individuals across all those functions and departments produce all kinds of content and assets around the world? Kind of looks like this. So generally, the way that this works, and I'm just going to move through this from left to right, is the content strategy group comes up with a need. Somebody requests a piece of content. They need, let's just say for the sake of this discussion, they need a one-page overview on a new product, right? So in past years, companies hired people whose entire job was to author content. They could learn the style guidelines, they could learn the terminology, they could keep up with the voice of the company. Today, however, your best content is authored by your smartest people, these subject matter experts. These folks are part-time writers who have other jobs, and part-time writers, that's a stretch, right? They're people that generally live in product management, product marketing. They are not writers by trade. Often, again, they're these experts in their space. They aren't, they're genius smart. They're just not the best at putting pen to paper. And as I say this, I know that you have people in your head you're thinking of right now. We all do. We've lived this life, and issues that run from language barriers to just plain clumsy writing make it necessary for the company to invest in editors and another group that can clean up that content. Now, when the subject matter experts hand their content off to those editors, the editors usually have a lot of work on their hands. It's not just cleaning up grammatical errors and spelling. It's cleaning up translation issues. It's adding corporate brand voice. It's increasing clarity levels, reducing technical and buzz speak. And so it's not something that an editor can do in a vacuum and then be done with. It's a back and forth process between the editor and the subject matter expert. So this kind of editing takes time and iterations. It ensures that the concepts that were created in the content aren't lost. External domain experts and editors are available, but that's more time, more money. So we're going back and forth now between the people that are writing and the people that are trying to make it ready. And once those iterations are complete, subject matter expert says, yes, this is what I was trying to say. The editor is happy with how it's written. They hand it off to the business stakeholder. Envision your business stakeholder. Stop for a second. Think of that person. That person gets a hold of the document and has an idea, right? I think what we should do is whatever it is that you didn't do in the document. And so that now puts us right back to the subject matter expert. Content goes back, subject matter expert needs to make the changes, and back to the editors we go. So you can see how this would get a little bit out of hand. Once that stakeholder is satisfied with content product, it's cleared for legal. Hey, did anybody check with legal on this? Now, most of you on this call work for big public companies, big private companies, companies that are regulated, companies that have legal requirements. How's that often go? So without thinking about legal early in the process, now you're looking at something that's not only time consuming, but probably expensive, and legal hands it back to you. And you can imagine that that's not a hand it back to you that just goes back to your stakeholder or your content team. It's probably something that needs to go through the process again. Finally, we get through this after weeks or months of production time, and the content's finalized and released for use. But as we'll see in a second, that doesn't always mean that the content created is valuable anymore, because while 82% of companies do believe that content is key in achieving their top objectives, and almost everyone looks into the future and sees content need continuing to grow, 50% of the people that were surveyed here said that they actually use 50% or less of the content they create. It's largely from a relevance standpoint. Content development takes too long. By the time the content's created, it's not a thing anymore. So you've spent the time, you spent the money, and in the end, much of the content that's ordered isn't really relevant and isn't used. So all that time and money ends up, well, wasted. So, I mean, how can we improve this process? How can we streamline it, accelerate it to operations that run at the pace of business, at scale, right? Well, one way is through a concept of content governance. Now, everyone has content governance, right? Forget it. I'm going to say yes. I mean, everyone has content governance, period. End of story. I'll bet you do, even if you don't think you do. Because, well, things like consistency matter, right? You know, who among us would stand up and say that in their company, consistency doesn't matter in content creation? Maybe, I mean, just maybe. Some small companies out there don't have a very defined brand, and so they don't have a really strong single voice to the market. But when I look out across the audience today at all of your smiling faces, I see some of the world's largest enterprises. And for instance, I mean, you right there. I'm not going to say your company name to maintain your privacy, but I see you at your desk, and your company is one of the most recognized and branded technology companies in the world. You're definitely speaking with one voice across your business. From a process standpoint, your company has a way of doing things, right? I mean, even if that way of doing things isn't great, it's still a governing approach. Diverging from the process causes problems and erodes the ability to successfully deliver an end product, right? I mean, that sounds accurate. And I think we can all agree that eliminating issues early in the process, if you think back to that diagram that I showed you, and solving problems at the SME level, like that's going to save you time and money further down the line, less review processes. If you're going to align at that point with legal, less legal review. The earlier it can be considered correct, accurate, on voice, and on target, the less time it takes to edit, the less likely it is to cause a delay, right? So most of us also have some form of measurement, because what we measure, we manage. And in most cases today, measurement of content production and delivery is marked in time and resource usage. And I'll count it. That's a form of governance. But being able to agree to a wider set of metrics allows every stage of the content development process to manage towards clarity, consistency, velocity, and brand alignment. So, recap. I think you and your company have a level of consistency that you expect in your content. You have either a departmental or corporate way of doing things. You're striving to develop good content early in the process, and you have some form of possibly ad hoc measurement. Do I win the bet? I bet you at the beginning, and now I think I probably won that bet so good. I'm going to say I did. I thought I would, but discovering during a webinar that you have a sense of content governance implies that you're only part of the way to where you need to be. And the thing is, right, governance is one thing. Deliberate or active governance is something else altogether. And in the case of many companies I've spoken to in the last few months, most are in fact practicing their own form of content governance, which is a good thing, but they lack a deliberate approach. They're not deliberate in setting up their rules, their guidance, their processes. They have an established way of doing things that's unique to their process, but that's about it. Their room for process improvement comes from taking a deliberate step towards what we call active content governance. You may also hear the term ACG. Now, what makes content governance go from active to passive? That's what we're here to talk about today. So as a reintroduction, I have Andrew Bredenkamp and Doug Kessler on the line, and I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. We set out about a year ago, the three of us, a little over a year ago, to define this aspiration of active content governance. So this is pretty much the OGs of ACG right here. And let's talk about what we mean, what we set out to do. I mean, I think the first thing that we should talk about really is what's the goal? What are we trying to do? Is AI a fit here? I mean, I think looking at Doug, Doug's a bit of a technology skeptic. And I think that, tying a goal to a technology is somewhat problematic. But Doug, what do you think on this?
Well, it's funny. I wouldn't call myself a total tech skeptic, but I mean, we are a tech marketing agency. I believe in it. But when I first heard about using AI to make writing better, and I know I'm dumbing it down a little bit when I say that, but I was very skeptical. And Andrew and I had lunch. This is a while back now, and I even left the lunch skeptical. I said, okay, I get this story, but we're talking about things like tone of voice. I mean, I get how you might use something like a checker for your style guides or your grammar, spelling, and all of that I get and benefit from every day. But I really didn't see that AI was going to help make a piece of writing better from a voice standpoint or clarity. And so I really did go into that very skeptically. And I guess, to be honest, I was pretty skeptical about governance too. That was a word I was a bit allergic to. It just feels like this army of librarians who want to stomp the fun out of everything and all the creativity out of everything. And so I came in thinking this was going to be a difficult ask to say that AI or any kind of software would actually raise a company's game from a content strategy standpoint or a tone of voice or guidelines or consistency. So that's been a journey for me. I, at the very beginning, really kind of rejected that idea. And over time, I've realized a whole lot of this supposedly soft stuff is quite measurable. You can break down readability and voice and tone into things like conversational signals that can be picked up and measured in text. So, little by little, I've come around until I'm now a bit of a zealot about the whole thing, both about governance itself and how it's a super positive force for releasing the value of content, but also the AI side that, wow, technology really can help here. And so that for me has been a bit of a journey, and I wouldn't blame anyone on the line now for being quite skeptical about both of those things.
Andrew, I think one of the company's key messages for many years has been this one clear voice statement. How does that tie for you to the concept of active content governance?
Yeah, I mean, I think we sometimes play with the idea of the robots are coming and taking over, certainly taking all the fun out of it, if not taking over our lives. And, of course, it's not quite like that. We have more of a model that I sometimes describe as being a bit like the Tesla autopilot. It just helps keep you in the lane. It doesn't tell you where to go. I think there's a lot of, as Doug says, there's a lot that the AI can do to just keep a large team of people honest as to, what goals did we say that we were trying to achieve, and what is it that we said we wanted to get done. And very concretely, they come down to things that everyone is, as you said, Chris, that everyone is already doing. People are having discussions about who are the buying personas we want to target, who is our target audience in general. Perhaps you're creating ABM where you're thinking about targeting a message for a particular account, where you're thinking about what will engage this particular audience. And as you do that, you're thinking actually often implicitly about the language that you need to create a connection with those people. And that will involve, as Doug says, partly tone, how modern do we want to be, how conversational do we want to be, but also looking at kind of the rhythm of a piece of content. How does it flow? And then a huge part of this is also the words and phrases that you use. You can use, your choice of words, as we all know, as content people, the choice of words can either create a connection. It can create this feeling of we're talking the same language, we're using the same words to describe things. So there's that kind of that good buzzwords that we want to hit on, but there's also the tired and cliched and perhaps bad jargon that will turn people off, it'll be confusing for maybe a different target audience. And again, there you've lost that connection. So your choice of words and phrases can make a huge difference. And all of those things together are if you like, thinking about what your blogs need to look like, what does your product content need to look like, who are the target audiences, how do we create a connection with those people, make these content effective. All of that is defined in terms of the language that you use, the messaging that you want to, the hot buttons that you want to hit. A huge portion of that is carried in the language that you choose to use, and obviously you want to do that consistently. You want to do it clearly, and so capturing that for the whole team, for all of the people who'll create this customer-facing content, is an enormously valuable exercise.
And I mean, I think at the end of the day, all of that comes together to that ability to create, this on-strategy, on-brand content at scale, and to be able to keep up with the speed of the business. I mean, I think that a lot of the folks on the call today, you work at very large organizations where this demand is not just huge, but it's increasing, right? And so the ability to keep up with that, I mean, there aren't enough hours in the day. I had a call with a person the other day, one of our customers, and she said, I am the person that approves content prior to production, prior to going out into the world in front of our audience. I get 200 emails a day, and I have to, the request is, do you approve this to go out? And I said, well, that's pretty cool. How many people do you have that help you with those 200 requests? None people. It's all me. And that's not uncommon. And it's also impossible. Like, it's not me being a marketer saying our product will solve an impossible problem. That's an impossible problem. You cannot do that. You can't go through and review 200 documents in a day for production ready release. It's not a thing that's possible. So active content governance, this aspiration inside the enterprise to reach this state of ACG, is about being able to keep up with that. It's about being able to know what's coming and be able to keep up with the pace of that business. Without it, content groups fall behind and become less relevant. And it's not just marketing. It's not just customer experience. It goes well into product as well. If you think about the time that the pace of product development now with agile and continuous integration, how do you keep up with your technical content that supports that? How do you keep up with your support documentation? How do you do any of that at the pace that the company's moving? You can't. This is the pathway to keeping up with the demand in the business. There is no other option. You have to, and this is one way to do that. So I think that leads to sort of the cost of doing this the old way. And I mean, I just started, and then I'll get out of the way. But the cost for this passive governance that most companies practice today is irrelevance. It's falling behind the process. It's becoming something that is unmanaged, that doesn't represent the brand well, because the time can't be spent, because there aren't the people, because there isn't the budget to be able to support that. And that's where there's this need for automation, for better process, for better measurement. Guys, what do you think on this? Where do you see the big risks of not evolving from a governance standpoint?
Yeah, for me, I can jump in there. I mean, we see it a lot across a lot of our clients, and you can look at the costs, like the process costs of inefficiency and delay, and just the cost of having to have editors look at everything, and the time spent, and the manpower, all of that stuff. But for me, the costs that are really painful are the cost to the impact to your audience. You know, you're either not making an impact because you got content too late or not to market at all, or it's to a poor quality, so you've given someone a bad customer experience. Those costs are massive. You know, the process stuff can be fixed, and it doesn't hurt so much. You know, it's some people wasting their time, and there's some wasted money, but those are the impacts where I think passive governance is really letting down big companies now. You know, it doesn't scale to say we'll write a tone of voice guideline book and we'll train every new writer into it, and it's just simply not scalable to have, you know, editors that, you know, the editor you were talking about who's looking at 200 emails a day, they're still only probably touching like 1% of the company content, even if they got through all those 200. So what's happening with the rest? It's either not getting to market at all, and that's a big impact, or it's getting there in really bad shape. Both of those are bad impacts. Those are things that need to be controlled now, need to be governed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of spinning of wheels, of kind of doing the same thing over and over again because you can't find a better way of doing it. There seems to be an acceptance that we can automate everything else, you know, no one would send out 2,000 emails to a mailing list by hand, by actually writing each one with copy and paste and hitting the send button. But somehow we think that writing content and editing content and agreeing, getting approval for content, that all is something that has to be done by hand. And because the only way of doing it is by doing it by hand, as Doug says, we'll only do a bit of it. You know, typically companies report to us that they're doing QA of some kind on about 1% of the content that gets in front of their customers, and that's a bit of a terrifying concept. You know, it's all very well getting stuff done faster, but at some point you need to be effective. You need to be in the game, and that means getting content out quickly that you know will engage is hugely valuable. We've seen people reporting that doing this well will really change the game. I think Chris is going to talk about this a little bit later, but you know, the benefits to this are not just in terms of making your lives easier in terms of getting the job done. The impact on the business is huge.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think what we'd like to talk about here is you know, why is this failing? And the things in my head, just to start the conversation, thinking about things like lack of solid guidelines. I'm thinking about training. I'm thinking about just adherence to general old process, manual editing, weak approval workflows and policies. But what specifically are you seeing in customers, Andrew, that is taking this down the wrong path?
I think it's not really rocket science. It comes down to the fact that if you just write down what you want and put it out there in some way, stick it on the website, or maybe provide some training for your team about what your goals are, you will. You know, the chances are it may work well for a little while, but the chances are that it will decay very quickly. That message will decay very quickly, and then it just becomes an aspiration. It becomes something that we said we wanted to do, but you have no way of measuring whether you're doing what you said you wanted to do, and often this is not because people don't want to do what you agreed to do as a team. It's also often because they don't remember. They're all busy. Everyone's trying to get on with their lives, and it's just it's not a realistic expectation to have people remember what all the products are called this week, or what the latest branding is if they've just been acquired as a company, or if you've decided that you want to move the tone of voice that you have to engage a different audience, to remember what that is. All of these passive ways of trying to get your trying to set your goals down are simply not going to be effective.
Doug, what do you got?
And I think a lot of this is also just pure scale. Like, you know, that content chaos map you put up early on with the stakeholders and legal and everything, all of that, I was like weeping when you put that up, because it's the story of my life. But it kind of worked if that was a single brochure and in low volume land, right? That, you know, you got there in the end, and to a good quality too. But this is why this is the moment for active content governance, is because this has exploded. Like, you multiply that content, that busy chaos slide you've got, by thousands and thousands of pieces of content in any given time period, you know, just unbelievable volumes. And that's where it really starts to fall down and just become scalable. I mean, even you can have creators of content with the best will in the world. They really do want to stay on brand, you know, but are they going to study the new guidelines if they could be issued every day and updated every day? Will they be studying them every time? You know, I've been given, let's say, glossary of terms we use and don't use that are 300 pages. You think, this is just not usable. I'm creating here. When will I even know when to look something up? And so there's that. Then there's the idea that the reviewers themselves aren't aligned. So let's say I follow the official style guide, but the senior VP of sales who's reviewing the thing hasn't read that. He's even less likely to, and he's going to change it back to something that may even be off brand, but is his view. So, you know, no way to align all the stakeholders and reviewers as well makes this fail too. So, you know, passive content governance, it's not like you couldn't have it. You always had to have it, but it just about creaked by in the old days of very low volumes and also low value. Like, now everyone realizes the whole customer journey is just, it's really a content journey, and everyone values content now, and yet it's exploded beyond traditional governance. So it just wasn't fit for purpose, you know. And the thing about, you know, Andrew's saying about, you know, one email at a time. Yeah, it's like we're using a tool that isn't fit for the new purpose of content. And that's why this kind of active approach had to emerge.
Absolutely. I mean, you're talking about things that people arguably maybe should know about. But if you go even beyond that, I'm a subject matter expert writing a piece of material. I don't know anything about legal boilerplate. I don't know anything about necessarily our positioning statements. Is there, I mean, how do I keep up with those things that change so rapidly? And
oh yeah, we got a client going into a dark period for an IPO. That changes all the rules, what you can write and what you can't. So the rules are updated instantly, but try to apply those across a huge amount of content creators. Super, super difficult.
It gets absolutely unmanageable. And that's why I think this, you know, the purpose of this framework it's not about trying to paint a really awesome picture of our platform. I mean, our platform is very special. Active content governance, there's a number of different ways that you can adopt it. I think, though, that as we start to talk about what it really is, you'll see that there's one way that is the fastest way to get there. And I'm going to show you that way today. So when we think about what active content governance is, the definition that we've created is right here in front of you. I've taken the liberty of bolding some text to draw it out, but active content governance is a systematic approach to capturing and digitizing your company's content strategy, measuring your content or your current content status, actively guiding content creation to achieve your stated goals and improve overall performance over time. That's all we're trying to do. Better content, faster, less money, more predictable, and programmatic. Like, it sounds like the machine that you've built elsewhere in your business. A lot of this came about, this concept came about from a sort of a position that I took as a CMO in a business. I know all kinds of things about demand gen, about the way that you build the model, top down, bottom up, conversion rates, expectations, what the results are going to look like, all the metrics we should be reporting on, both while we're in the engine and what comes out of the engine. And then you ask the average head of marketing, what do you know about your content engine? And a lot of what people say tends to be post-production metrics. Well, I know how many times it's been viewed, and I know how it converts on our website. I know how many shares it gets. I know a bunch of things about it. Well, you didn't tell me anything about what's happening in the engine. You haven't told me anything about how it aligns to what you expected to build. You didn't tell me anything about how you accelerated the production process of this. So when we think about this, this concept of active content governance, we're thinking about looking at quality, looking at the KPIs you measure, looking at guidance and how it's given, looking at the review cycles and how you affect it, editing, and how that comes together, and finally best practices that you can use to automate some of this. So guys, I mean, just when we set out to build this definition across those categories, what do you think is important here? What really makes ACG come alive?
I think a big part of this is you know, what we've tried to do as we've built Acrolinx up over many long years of working with some of the biggest, most innovative companies in the world. We've learned a lot, and we've learned a lot. What we've been trying to do is find out where those bottlenecks are. Where is the pain in the process of getting good content done at scale, and how can we smooth that out? How can we add technology to the mix to make that to make that a better process? And so, you know, we think of it in these four terms in terms of first capturing what it is that you're trying to do, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But that capture process is something that I think is key to being able to do any governance, is making sure we actually have some clarity on what it was we said we were going to do. Quite often people say, oh yeah, we follow this guide or that guide, and when you look at their content, it turns out that's not what they're doing. They're doing something else that everyone thought was okay, which is fine, but you've said that what you're doing. On the other hand, you're not applying it. So it brings me to the second point, where we're able to, once we've captured those goals and that content strategy in terms of audiences and tone of voice and all that stuff, then you can test on where are you? What are you actually doing now? Are you following those guidelines? To what extent are you compliant with the goals that you've set yourself? How are you doing? And then once you've done that kind of benchmarking, you're able to then start to operationalize the platform in terms of really making sure that you are going to do this from now on, that you can apply those goals then to content in a way, a measurement against those goals to content, both in terms of helping writers, but also in terms of really, automating decision making through it. And number four, this huge part of this is what the measurement gives you, is the ability to get better over time. I think a lot of this sounds nice as a one-off project, but this really isn't a one-off project. No more than writing new branding guidelines or a style guide or coming up with a new branding is a one-off thing. It's something you have to live and breathe, and the only way to do that is to make sure that you're measuring where you are with stuff.
One of the cool things for me was, this idea of capturing and digitizing content strategy. That just sounds so abstract. Like, how can you do that? How would I digitize and capture a strategy in any other part of business? And then you start getting close to it and realize, oh, you really can. If readability and conversationality is something we want in, let's say, our blog, we can define and measure that and capture that. So if it's simple as a style guide, which style guide we're using, that's cool. But let's say it's something like search terms, that we want this stuff to be discoverable on our blog. So we're going to apply some SEO rules to make sure that when this stuff's created, people are thinking about the terms in the way their buyers do. These are just examples of capturing strategy in a way that makes it measurable and that you can operationalize it. You just used that word, Andrew, and I really like that as the definition of active content governance as well, which is a way to operationalize your content strategy. So you've got a strategy, now like push it down to the ground or make it work, and another part of this, the 4 steps that impressed me a lot as I got close to this, was the guidance part, the idea that, okay, you've captured it. Now, as someone's writing, you have this sidebar that can pop up guidance that says, whoa, that, you might want to think about that. That sentence is around 9 times longer than what we think is the longest readable sentence, stuff like that. That idea that guidance can get in there and raise the quality of a piece before anyone has to review it was a really cool insight for me too. And again, I had a bit of a skeptical reaction, like, well, won't writers hate that? This kind of policeman sitting on their shoulder while they write. But now I totally welcome it. I think, yeah, if this is going to mean I revise this thing once instead of 5 times or 10 times because I'm following these simple things, yeah, I'll take that, please. So, I've seen when writers start getting access to this kind of guidance, they grab it. It's like nobody wants to do the kind of rewrites and revisions that you were describing, that chaos process. So
no, one of our customers said the best thing that I've ever heard on that subject, which was, Acrolinx never has a bad day. Acrolinx isn't judgy. Acrolinx doesn't not like what you're wearing. Acrolinx isn't going to come up and tap you on the shoulder and say, you got to work late. It's not a human editor, which is a bit, snarky and whatever. I mean, this is an objective view. And I think one of the things that I'm really drawn to about active content governance myself, and the way that I use it every day, is around the KPIs that it provides, the definition of good and the definition of done. And as somebody that asks people to write things on a fairly regular basis, hey, can you get that done, and can you make it good? And what in the world does that mean? And when you can align content with your strategy, when you can take that content strategy, that brand strategy, right off a whiteboard, right, and digitize it, and make it actionable, and find that delta between what you thought you were creating and what you're actually creating, you end up with that definition of good. And for me, in this organization, I've requested that I don't see documents that come in with anything lower than an 80 Acrolinx score. And if you don't know what that means, you're going to know in a couple seconds because we're going to show you. But that creates a whole different engagement. I'm not reading content looking for mistakes. I'm fairly certain that this is on brand, on voice, clear, consistent, easy to read. It's designed for our audience. And now I'm reading it to see if, well, honestly, I like it and I think it represents our business. And that gets lost now. That's not a thing that a lot of companies can afford to do, is to have that kind of opinion. I'm working at a pace where I'm just trying to make sure this doesn't have any obscenities in it before I put it up on our website. And that's not okay, but it's okay because that's what we do. That's what the scale allows us to do. But there's ways around that. And I think that's a big driver of ACG for me in my
I use this. I use Acrolinx whenever I get a piece of content, or whenever I've written something. I'm not always great at writing for the target audience of people who aren't like me, and so I use it regularly. And I find one of the biggest things is not that, obviously I've read the whole thing because I've written it, or maybe I've given a brief on it, just to be able to jump to the parts that need my attention is a huge time saver.
So I've thrown up a big blinking sales pitch alert up on the screen. Look, I'm a content marketer at heart, and I'm trying to create actionable content. And this webinar series is part of that. And I hope that you take away some actions that you can bring to your business today to improve your process. And that's really the design of all of the things that we provide. There's a 43-page book that the three of us worked on that's available on our website, the Active Content Governance Handbook. I hope you'll take a moment to read it. While it sounds long, the intent of it was to create the playbook on how to do this in your business, whether you use software or not. But at the end of the day, I really honestly believe, and it's the primary driver that I work at this company, is I believe this product, this platform, can help you streamline this process quickly and immediately. And I can't think of a better person to introduce it to you than the founder of the company and the person that really invented this. So I'm going to get out of the way, and by getting out of the way, I'm still going to progress the slides. So Andrew, tell me when you want to flip. But if you could just take a really quick 5-minute run through of sort of how we think through what this thing does.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'll go as quickly as I can. I think we've kind of drawn this picture already conceptually, but just to put it out visually and to actually put bits of the platform behind that to make it a bit more concrete. We talk about these three main stages. The first part we talked about is capture, understanding your goals, and they may not even be written down. Occasionally, people will have, they won't necessarily have a tone of voice written down. It'll just be like, we want to be like that. And so there's a process of capturing what that means in terms of what does good mean in terms of tone of voice, etc. The words that people use, words and phrases that are important, they may not be in a reliable list. So we have to capture those. So the capture process is a key part of setting yourself up for success. And then once the goals are captured, this alignment piece is where you get the organization aligned around those goals. You get your content aligned around those goals, and that's split up into two parts. One is to automate the checking of content, the scoring of content as it goes through a process. This might be in a workflow, it might be in a handoff from one part to another. So that's kind of an automated checking. And then we talked about this guidance for writers. So an editor in a box, a little sidebar that pops up and gives you guidance as a content creator or content contributor. And feeding into both of those will feed the analytics engine, which is capturing data around content scoring in lots of different dimensions. And that will then feed back into informed decisions you can then make about your goals, whether they need tweaking, whether specific things are working or not. So the individual parts of this, we have a content analyzer that allows you to look at content in large batch modes to be able to run your entire website, or this particular instance is a release, a campaign, a marketing campaign that's going out where you're running through all of the collateral, the email, the PDFs, the other bits and pieces of content, to be able to check that they're all aligned with the target audience, right? The next piece is where you start to look at, if you advance the slide, where you start to capture from that, you look at what are our content goals and how can we define those in a way. This is really just like defining your style guide, mapping your style guide for your target audience, but doing it in a way, as we said, that you can operationalize, that is really going to be, it's going to happen once you've set these standards. And you can see this is as simple as defining how simple your content needs to be, how conversational it is. Then you move into this guidance. Sorry, you can move forward, Chris. Then you move into this the guidance piece, where we have these sidebars. Wherever you're creating content, you're going to get little cards popping up, showing you, giving you help and advice on the bits and pieces of the content that you might want to work on. And the second screen you can see is the findability piece of the sidebar, where it's going to highlight which keywords is this prominent for. So which keywords are prominent in what you've just written, and to help you maybe say, we want to be targeting specific words. We want to be found if people look for specific words. All of your SEO strategy can be embedded in here, so that you can give writers feedback on whether they're prominent, whether they're visible, whether they're findable for those specific keywords that they're targeting. All of that obviously live and available wherever content is getting edited. The automation process is where we start to look at content moving through a complex process. This might be an automatic process, as in here you can see something flowing through Confluence. A lot of people are managing marketing campaigns or all sorts of support organizations, all sorts of customer-facing content through Confluence. But this also might be an even more fully automated process, like in an engineering environment where content is embedded in a product, or an agile process where content's just sitting in a GitHub repository, and every time it gets checked in, it can get scored, and activities can get triggered based on that score, as well as obviously hooking that into feedback if you open the scoring. The analytics then is looking at all of this content that's going through the engine and collecting you different views of your content groups. We work with this concept of content groups, so this could be the website, the support content, the product content, whatever. And you can then look at those content types. You can see, where do we have risk in there? Are we compliant with whatever we need to be doing? And as I said before, are we getting better? The other piece you can do with this is, of course, is to see where we have issues. Maybe you do need some training for the team to help them avoid those issues if you're seeing them coming up over and over again. But this really is key to being able to track and improve the process. It's also a great way of you being able to capture the value when you start to talk to management about, how are we getting better and how are we getting better faster.
All right. So, look, any content approach is better than no content approach. And governance is no different. I mean, becoming active, adopting this ACG approach, it has its benefits. It has benefits for you, for your business, but also for your customers. So looking at it from your business standpoint, I mean, active content governance is going to accelerate content velocity by publishing and distributing more content faster. And when you think about the world that I sit in, if I know that I'm getting a piece of marketing content developed, and it's going to take 4 months to get this campaign and all of its associated content developed, we're sitting now at the end of March. I'll have it at the beginning of Q3. It'll start generating leads maybe mid Q3. Those are going to turn into opportunities in Q4. I'm talking about Q1 revenue. What is it worth to you to streamline that process? Time to market means money. In marketing, it means more leads faster. In pharmaceuticals, it could mean drug release faster through the FDA process. It could mean a lot of money through this acceleration. It also drives down the cost of content by streamlining production and eliminating any duplication of effort. So it's not just that time to market, but it's the whole engine. Andrew mentioned earlier, some of our customers going from a batch of editors to maybe one administrator and covering dramatically more content. In one case, we saw it go from 1% coverage of content to 100% coverage of content over the course of a year and a half. Think of the savings associated with that: time, money, and what you could do with that. And things like allowing you to use your content across more channels. I'm using here the concept of translation. It could be in languages, or it could just be in distribution channels in general. Getting your content out in more ways, in more forms, for less. But for your customers, well, your customers will see you more clearly. And that's a thing that we're hearing now from even the biggest enterprises, that brand matters. And bringing your brand to the forefront of everything you do isn't just an aspiration, it's a requirement today. Content's going to be more useful through clarity improvements. It's going to be more findable by optimizing the use of keywords. It's going to be more timely, being delivered to your audience at that point of highest need, and not sometime in the distant future. I mean, this is how you get to where you need to be from an enterprise content development process standpoint, at speed, at scale. So in closing, I want to thank Andrew and Doug for taking time out of their days to spend with us today. I thought this was really exciting. I hope that you agree. I'm doing something here that I don't normally do. I don't really like people to have my phone number. It's a terrible idea. But that's my phone number right there. I'm giving it to you. Don't share it. It's just for you. Text your name, title, and email to me right now, and I will set you up with an expert that can talk you through this in person. I really want us to be able to talk to you. This is an important concept, and whether you buy a solution, don't buy a solution, or what other options might be available to you, this is a direction you need to head, and we want to help you with that. So if you like what you saw, text me, visit the website, fill out a form, pick up our Active Content Governance ebook. It's right on the front page. And the last thing that I'll say is that our Content Connexions conference 2019 is coming up in June on 2 continents. We have a Boston event and a Berlin event. Again, there's a link right from the home front page of our website at acrolinx.com, and I would welcome you to register and come to that event as well. So guys, thank you very much for your time. Audience, thank you very much for your time. Team, thanks for setting this up, and we'll see you next time when we come back with part 2 of our Content Chaos series. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.